Hello and welcome. This is Separated by Force, Afstandsmoeders in the Netherlands. My name is Sarah Tekath, and today we're going to have a closer look into Moederheil, one of the biggest mother-baby homes in the Netherlands, located in Breda. In 1972, Harlinde van Osselaer started working there as a psychologist. Being 24 years of age herself at the time, she was hardly any older than some of the pregnant women at Moederheil. Today, Harlinde is going to explain what kind of place Moederheil was, how she has experienced working there, and how, from her professional perspective, this place has emotionally and psychologically damaged the women and the children for their entire life. Harlinde, welcome. How did you find the job at Moederheil, and what was your position there?
I found this job via a colleague of my husband who had a friend who was the director of Moederheil. The job was for a psychologist for 12 hours per week. I was supposed to check on the babies for the childcare and protection board, whether they were ready to be adopted.
Does that mean that you didn't have any contact with the women at Moederheil?
Officially not, but it was only like that in the beginning. After roughly 6 weeks, I told the director that I didn't want to work like this. I told him what I wanted to change and that he had to agree to that, otherwise I'd quit. I succeeded with that and my hours were doubled. When I was working there for 24 hours a week, I also had contact with the mothers.
What did a typical work day for you look like?
I worked 4 times 6 hours on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday. At least officially, because in the end I worked more hours than that. I tested the children, I joined the meetings, but I also often had coffee with the group of unmarried mothers. I was in touch with the social workers of the childcare and protection board. Later on, I also became part of the management of National Umbrella Organization for Unmarried Mothers. So every day was different.
Dus er waren gevarieerde dagen.
Generally speaking, how many women were there at Moederheil?
Within the first years, there were usually between 15 and 20 women, but later it became a lot less.
Could you please describe the environment and the atmosphere of this place?
Het was een heel groot, heel licht huis.
It was a large, spacious and bright building. All the departments were strictly separated. Also, the area of the unmarried mothers, the area where they gave birth, and the area of the children. They were all little worlds of their own within the building. At the area of the mothers, the atmosphere was really diverse. Most of the girls were really reserved, sad, and quiet. In the area of the children, it was always really quiet, which of course is strange for a house with so many babies. Later, I also understood the reason for that. And around the building, there were many trees. It was a really quiet location.
Rustig gelegen ook.
What state were the women in that you were talking to?
Nou, dat was heel verschillend.
That was very distinct. Some of the girls seemed numbed and very passive. And other girls that I have visited again after they gave birth were inconsolable and sad or rebellious. I spoke to them and advised them to not give up their babies. I have done my best to convince them that it was not mandatory, even though people had told them so before. I also told them that in the Netherlands, not one single baby was dying of hunger, but the social pressure was so intense and the girls felt so uninformed and left alone that most of them chose to give up their babies. in the end. Most of the girls quickly left Moederheil after they gave birth, and I never got to see them again. So I don't know how their life continued afterwards.
For how long did you work at Moederheil?
Ik heb tot 81 gewerkt, maar mijn functie is...
I have worked there until 1981, but my job had changed in the meantime. The mother-baby home became bigger. First, I had worked for all departments, mothers and babies, but later more departments were added, such as a refuge for abused women, but also a shelter for young mothers and their babies who couldn't live with the mother's parents. As all these departments were added, I worked exclusively with the abused women, not with the children.
En toen was ik weg van de kinderafdeling dus.
Among the staff, were there any discussions or doubts that what was happening there was not quite right?
Algemene discussies kan ik me niet herinneren.
I do not recall any general discussions. Of course, I cannot speak for all of the Netherlands, but at least at Moederheil, I have never seen staff pressuring the mothers to give up their babies. The staff mostly worked with what the mothers or her parents wanted. But what indeed did happen is that I told people that the way the babies and children were treated was absolutely irresponsible, and most of the staff agreed with me. So I was given the chance to change that and to improve things. But there was only me and the director who had an education, a few team leaders and the nurses. So staff is a very big word, as it was mostly me or the director who made decisions. Discussions about unethical behavior therefore did not happen. But it was also not Moederheil who chose the future of the children. The Child Care and Protection Board was responsible for that. Therefore, we did not have as much influence in this, only indirectly.
Directe invloed op. Indirect natuurlijk wel, maar niet direct.
In a talk show on Dutch TV, you called it a clever game, what was happening there. What do you mean by that?
Nou ja, een spel is het natuurlijk niet, want het is dramatisch.
Of course, it is not really a game, because it is really dramatic. But the situation in which the mothers found themselves was not being forced per se. But there was this game of destroying the self-confidence of these girls, very often by their own parents. The parents told them that they, the girls, are absolutely incapable of taking care of their babies, and that therefore they had to give them up. And of course, if the girl has no self-confidence and doesn't get stimulated in what she is capable of, then of course she feels helpless and chooses to give up her child. Large parts of the pressure also came from the society. It was a great shame to give up a child, and the biological fathers, they had no part in these stories at all. Often the girls didn't dare to tell who the biological father was. For sure not if it was a teacher, a priest, or a sport coach. The girls were shamed into not telling anybody who the father was. They were threatened. If you tell people who the father is, then you will ruin his life and destroy his family. I am convinced that even today in the Netherlands, there are still women that have never told anybody who is the biological father of their child, which they have given away. And additionally, incest was also a thing. If a girl shows up twice within 1 year and tells a story of a man that had jumped out of the bushes and had made her pregnant, then I was convinced that the biological father of the baby was probably very closely related to her. So there was a lot of talk about incest, but of course there was no proof.
Dus het was een geraffineerde manier om die meisjes tot afstand doen.
So yes, it was a very clever way to force the girls to give up their children. Some of the girls were not strongly affected by that, but with others, it was very clear to me that they will probably regret this decision for the rest of their lives. That's very dramatical to see. But in my position as a psychologist, I was not really able to change that. What I was able to change was the way the children were treated in the Moederheil. And that is also what I have managed to improve at that time. That they were adopted quicker, that they were treated better, and that they were not given tranquilizing medication anymore. As I said earlier, I noticed that it was awfully quiet at Moederheil, and then I learned that the children were giving tranquilizers, which were extremely harmful for their development. This is something what I was able to change. This was also why I went to the director after 6 weeks and told him that this needed to change immediately, otherwise I would quit. So this had improved, and I am happy that I was able to achieve that. But of course, that does not change how shocking it is that the previous psychologist at the Moederheil applied such a form of treatment, even though it was already clear in 1950s that it was harmful. They should have known that. Additionally, at that time in the Netherlands, there were popular psychiatrists such as Trimbos, who claimed that unmarried mothers are disturbed, asocial beings. This really makes me angry, because this has influenced the society in such a negative way.
Heel kwalijk, want dat heeft ook heel veel invloed gehad op de maatschappij toen.
During the process of giving birth, many women were blindfolded and they were never given the chance to hold their babies. What does this do to a person?
Ja, ik denk dat
Well, this must be awful, but I also think that this is not how it happened every single time. However, the theory behind it was that if the mother doesn't see the baby, it will be easier for her to give it away. But of course, this is a horrible procedure. I have never seen it happening. I have seen a few women giving birth, but never an afstandsmoeder. But I can imagine that this must be very traumatizing for her, also for her ability to process the experience later on. There have been cases that I thought maybe the child is better off in an adoptive family, but these were very few cases. Generally speaking, I think that giving up your child is something you must not do. But of course, it did happen. Same with the blindfolds during birth. I have never seen it happen, but I know that it did happen.
For decades, some women did not speak about the experience that they had because they were too ashamed. But objectively speaking, there was no chance that they could have gotten out of this situation without giving up their babies. What causes this feeling of shame?
Het was niet zo dat alle vrouwen die in Moederheil kwamen
Not all the women who came to Moederheil gave up their babies. There were also girls that refused to do so. They have left their babies at Moederheil to first find a job and a home, and as soon as this was done, they came back to pick up the baby. That did happen as well. This is why I have also started a group of young mothers that could not live with their parents in order to give them a chance to keep their babies. The baby stayed at Moederheil and the mother went to school or to work and visited her baby regularly. So not all of the babies were given up. But getting pregnant without being married was heavily shamed. We need to look at this with the eyes of the past, not with the eyes of today. Mobile phones and pregnancy tests didn't exist, and very often it was power abuse of the men that impregnated these girls and who told them that they mustn't tell anybody about the biological father. So the girls took all the blame and kept their mouths shut to not ruin the lives of these men. Very often, these were relationships with teachers or other authority figures. But in general, getting pregnant while being unmarried was a huge shame, because that meant that she had sex before marriage, and that was forbidden. Giving up the baby was a shame as well, because the women felt guilty and they were doubting if they are capable of taking care of the child. But at the same time, they were surrounded by people who told them that they would be incapable of taking care of the child. Therefore, these girls were all lost. They were completely isolated socially. These days, there are ways to ask for support, such as the Social Assistance Act, which already did exist back then, but was never used for this group of women. It was a very complex situation of being forced, intimidation and shaming. And the women thought that giving up their baby was the only option. And even today, women who have had other babies afterwards still feel guilty about giving up the first baby. They feel guilty because they are doubting if they have really done everything that was possible back then to keep their child.
Ik kan me best voorstellen dat ze zich schaamden. Dat ze niet alles deden zoals het moest.
Is it possible that the women were so traumatized that they completely forgot about their experience?
Ja, ik denk wel dat het zo is dat heel veel vrouwen moeite gedaan hebben.
Yes, I think many women have indeed tried to erase this experience from their memory. Because of course, for one person this is easier than for another. In situations like this, what often happens is a depersonalization. If a person experienced something really bad, they try to switch themselves off. And generally speaking, giving birth is already a very impactful experience, especially when the child is taken away like this. But it is not the case that all women who gave up their child are damaged for life without being able to function ever again. Many of them became very loving mothers of children that were born afterwards. But of course, there is a wound that remains. I think it is rather unlikely that the women do not remember anything at all. But on the other hand, that would also be completely justified.
Ze hebben er ook alle belang bij om gewoon niets meer te weten.
Photos have shown that at the mother-baby homes, the children were pretty much left to themselves all day in their bed. There were no toys, they were never picked up, they were never cuddled. How does this affect the emotions of a human being?
Ja, die kinderen waren gedepriveerd.
Yes, the children were deprived of so many things. They indeed didn't have any toys. They were barely ever touched, spoken to, or played with. But surprisingly, there were still children that came out of this unharmed and who managed to catch up on their underdevelopment. However, it is evident that such living conditions are harmful to a child.
zijn ook geconstateerd.
Also, statistics have proven that this has caused an underdevelopment.
Vooral de jongetjes.
Remarkably, especially the boys, more than the girls, were struggling motorically. Furthermore, I think they were also socially damaged. Maybe one child more than the other because there were always variations. For one child, it is easier to deal with the lack of care than for another one. This very often also depends on the looks. A pretty baby was more likely to be picked up than a less pretty baby. Furthermore, the age when the child was adopted, how smoothly the adoption went, and the behavior of the adoptive parents afterwards play an important role. Still, I think that there is a group of children that have been irreversibly damaged by their experience and their bad start in life.
Many of the children stayed in the mother-baby home without being adopted for quite a while. In which way does this affect a person's ability to build a relationship with the other person later on in their life, or to build trust in general?
Nou, er waren heel weinig kinderen boven de 2 jaar. Dus
there were very few children above the age of 2. I have rarely seen that children stayed at Moederheil who were older than 2 years of age. The older children that were there were not meant for adoption. They stayed at Moederheil while the mother was working and she came for a regular visit. That was a different situation. However, the duration of the child's stay at the mother-baby homes clearly affects their development. But there were also relationships that grew between the nurses and the children. Often they took the older children home with them. That way, the children got the chance to partly catch up on their underdevelopment. But nevertheless, it is very harmful for a child to live in such conditions, and it strongly affects their ability to build trust and relationships. There are for sure children that are struggling with that later in life. Still, I wouldn't dare to say that all these children were hopelessly damaged for life. Many of them managed to recover, but on the other hand, the effect can still be visible in an adult when a person is really clumsy. This is based on motorical underdevelopment due to the lack of toys at the mother-baby home. On the other hand, there might be children that were mostly emotionally affected. It is very difficult to make a general statement about how the living conditions have affected all the children. But nonetheless, it is evident that the living conditions indeed did have a negative impact.
Many children learned only many years after the adoption that the family they were living with was actually not their biological family. How does this affect a person?
I think that it is a shock, for sure. Generally, here in the Netherlands, it is advised, in case of adoption, to inform the children as soon as possible. I believe the later the child learns about it, the worse it gets. But of course, it causes identity issues and it raises many questions. Some adoptive parents supported their children in their search for their biological parents. Others didn't. From my point of view, it is very important that the children get the chance to get to know their biological parents, or at least their biological mother. But clearly, this will never turn into a normal mother-child relationship.
moeder-kindrelatie wordt
it is impossible to catch up on the time which they have lost.
verloren is, die is verloren. Daar kan je niet
Still, I think it is good for child's development to meet with their biological parents,
maken met hun biologische.
even though the connection that is made between a baby and the parent from the birth will never be achieved.
Ouder en kind als het kind.
This will be impossible to fix.
Daar kan je niet meer inhalen. Daar kan je niet meer repareren, denk ik.
In some families, there has been a lot of shaming of the biological mother, that she has been a bad person because she slept with a man before she got married to him. How does this affect a child to hear such bad talk about its biological mother?
Nou, het lijkt me voor een kind heel erg om zoiets
I believe
te
that
horen.
must be
Aan de andere
very
kant
rough for a
wordt
child
er
to
nog
hear.
altijd gezegd,
On the other hand, there was always said,
niet voor je zorgen.
your mother wasn't able to take care of you, or she didn't want to take care of you. And the father was hardly ever mentioned. This is a sort of justification of the adoption, but it is not entirely true. Therefore, I think that for many afstandskinderen, it is important to understand that their mother indeed wanted to take care of them, but simply wasn't given a chance. That she wasn't a bad person, but it was a bad system. This is why I believe that it is important to correct the picture of the birth mother being a bad woman.
Dat beeld van de slechte moeder, dat gerectificeerd wordt.
Some children have decided to reach out to their biological mothers, others didn't. What are the psychological reasons to make such a choice?
Nou, ik denk een belangrijke factor is denk ik dat ze het
I think a very important factor is that they are feeling like they were betraying their adoptive parents. Now that many of the adoptive parents have died and the children have grown up, they start searching for their biological parents. It is also possible that the adoptive parents are worried that the biological mother will show up and claim the child back, which they have raised all these years, or that the child will love the biological mother more than them, which is really understandable. Another important part is the fear of causing confusion for the child or being confronted with a very traumatic experience that they do not want to share. Some people cannot handle indistances, and of course, the search for the biological parents will cause a lot of questions and confusion, as well as emotions and disappointments. This also destroys the romantic idea of mother and her child. So, in the end, it is a consideration of each individual person of how much they can handle and how much they want to know. Clearly, children should never be forced to meet their biological parents, but for the afstandmoeders, it is also good to see what has become of their child and how their child is doing, in case they wish to know. Regardless of all the trouble this may cause, I think, after all, it is better for the children and their biological mothers to get to know each other.
De afstandsmoeder als het kind.
After such a traumatic experience for both sides, would it even be possible to have a healthy relationship with each other?
Nou, ik denk wel dat ze een gezonde relatie kunnen hebben. En ook een
I think they will be able to develop a healthy and emotional relationship, but for sure it won't be the same as the relationship of the biological parents and their child who have spent their entire life together. Of course, that might be something they wish for, but I have doubts that it will be possible. Nonetheless, there will be some sort of connection, but there have also been relationships that fell apart again, as the confrontation with the trauma or the physical resemblance of her child with the biological father were too much to bear. On the other hand, it is possible that the biological parents claim the child too much, which also destroys the relationship. But nonetheless, I believe that a healthy relationship, whatever that means, is for sure possible and beneficial to both sides.
En goed, ook voor beide partijen.
What would be necessary for the afstandsmoeders and their children to heal? Would that be possible at all?
Nou, ik denk dat het in ieder geval
For the afstandsmoeders, it is crucial to have people of trust in this situation, regardless if they have contact with their children, because they had to face years and years of being shut up. Therefore, I think it is important that they are given the chance to talk about their experiences and to process them. But I doubt that they will be able to ever heal completely. This is not something that ever passes completely. A relationship between a mother and a child can be helpful, but at the same time, if they are mostly harmful to each other, they also have to admit that it is better to not hurt each other even more. And then it is better to stop, at least for a while.
Tenminste tijdelijk.
Harlinde, thank you very much.
Graag gedaan.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening. This was Separated by Force, Afstandsmoeders in the Netherlands. If you like this podcast, please feel free to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcast. If you want to support our cause, please share this podcast in your social media to reach the utmost attention for the injustice that has been done to afstandsmoeders and their children in the Netherlands and all over the world. Thank you very much and have a great day.